Now we've got 4 key FPL assets potentially due back this game week, with Salah and Son off to the AFCON and Asia Cup. Who are their best replacements? I've got all the other info you need to know regarding those tournaments, and I've done a wildcard draft as well. These are my early thoughts going into game week 21. Now we'll start the video on a positive note, shall we, and talk about 4 players that are either confirmed to be returning or could potentially be returning in game week 21. We've got Erling Haaland, current top scorer in the Premier League, 14 goals from 15 starts. The latest update we've got from Pep Guardiola is that he was hoping for Erling Haaland to be back in January. We saw some, training. I don't really know what they were. He was running on grass, pictures of him running on grass in Saudi Arabia for the Club World Cup. Personally, I don't have any more info than what Pep Guardiola has given us so far. Haaland's not trained, up until game week 20 anyway. I do think there's a chance he could be back for game week 21. Ivan Toney has finished his betting ban and is due to be back for Brentford for game week 21. I don't have any stats for him this season. Of course, he's been banned the entire time, and there are, to be fair, some transfer rumours linking him to Arsenal and Chelsea amongst some other clubs. I don't have any stats for him this season, but last season started 33 games, scored 20 goals. We all know he's absolutely nailed in the Brentford team, takes their penalties, and is of course just a fantastic asset. And I'd say without Toney in their team, I'd actually be worried about Brentford getting relegated. They look pretty woeful at the moment. Like, they could well drop into that bottom 3. And I think just with that in mind, I think they'll do all they can to hold on to Ivan Toney. And for that reason, I think he's going to play the rest of the season for them. James Maddison, another player due back in January from his ankle injury. Question marks, of course, whether that will be for game week 21. FPL is currently predicting him to be. We obviously have to keep an eye on Ange's press conferences for Spurs, but there's a chance that Maddison could be back, and that's, of course, really exciting. And then Pedro Neto, I think Watkins has just overtaken him now, but from just 10 starts, he was leading the Premier League assist tally up until last week. 8 assists from 10 starts and 1 goal, so he had pretty much an attacking return per game week. And we all know how good Wolves have been, right? So I think he's a good option as well, and he is due back, played I think 10 minutes in game week 20, 10 or so minutes, so he will be back for game week 21. Now, if you're an avid viewer of this channel, I'm going to apologise. I've shown this graphic in pretty much every one of my last 7 or 8 videos, I think, but it's really important to be cognizant of how the AFCON and Asia Cup will impact FPL. And this graphic, thanks to Rob T FPL on Twitter, it shows, depending on how far these various nations get in their tournaments, when the players are likely to be due back in FPL. Now, I've said in previous videos my predictions for how I think the tournaments are going to play out, and I'm not condoning gambling in any way, but one of the best predictors, I think, of sporting outcomes are the ones that money relies upon, basically, and betting companies spend millions and millions of pounds on algorithms and maths that predict the outcome of football games, sporting events and tournaments, right? So, in my opinion, there's no better place to look for tournament outcomes than betting odds. And here's what we've got for both tournaments. So we've got the Asia Cup on the left and the African Cup of Nations on the right. So the key players you'll probably be looking at, certainly Salah and Son. Son is second favourite with South Korea to win the tournament, which suggests, if you just go back to the tournament tree again, which suggests he's likely back, or sort of game week 25, 26 time, if, the tournament plays out the way the betting odds do. And when you look at Egypt and Salah, well, they're 5th favourites. So, that suggests, quarterfinals, semi-finals. So that means Salah, if you look at the betting odds alone, he's probably out for 3 or 4 game weeks, I would say. You can see quarterfinals of the African Cup of Nations finish game week 23, so likely back game week 24, 25. Or if he gets to the semi-final, he's likely back game week 25, 26. So, yeah, just thought I'd add a little bit of evidence to some of the claims that I've made about the tournaments. Obviously, no one can predict the outcome of them, right? So no one can confirm that they know what's going to happen. But I think the betting odds are probably the best way to look for a prediction. Now, I'm not going to linger on this page, but this is a graphic from Sky Sports that tell you all of the players in the Premier League that are off to these respective tournaments and the teams that they play for. So yeah, here's your chance to pause it if you want to see the other players other than Salah and Son that are off. So if we go by the betting odds at least, Egypt were, 5th favourites to win the AFCON, and South Korea was 2nd favourites to win the Asia Cup. So going by betting odds alone, you'd have Egypt exiting either sort of quarterfinal, semi-final stage. And South Korea, I really do believe, in my opinion, they're the strongest team in Asia. And if you look at the betting odds, that suggests they'll at least get to the final. So we're going to miss, I'd say, 4 or 5 game weeks of Heung-min Son, and at least I'd say 3 game weeks of Mo Salah. So with that time frame in mind and the amount of money that they're probably costing you on your team, I do think it makes sense to sell them, and I've got a list of the best players to replace them next. Alright, so here are, I think, 9 or 10 of the best replacements. I've ranked them by expected returns per 90. We've got Palmer, Saka, Elise, Richarlison, Maddison if he's fit, Jota, Bowen, Odegaard, Foden, Garnacho, Elanga, and Gibbs-White. So, I mean, really, I've got 5 players that I'll move on to next that I think are the picks of this bunch. But I think if you're looking for a big group of players to select from to replace Salah and Son, I think these are your lot. And I imagine, you know, some of these players are the most popular picks in FPL, right? So you probably already own some of these players. So that's why I've done such a big list, because I'm sure there's 1 or 2, well, there has to be 1 or 2 players here that you don't currently own that you might want to consider replacing Salah or Son with. And my top 5 are as follows. I've got Cole Palmer, Bukayo Saka, Bowen, Richarlison, and Elise. One thing I like about all 3 of these players, I think Richarlison is now in this category, particularly with obviously Son out. I think all of them are absolutely nailed to start for their respective teams. There's no worry about rotation for them. You know, the likes of Phil Foden you saw in the previous list, he could do well, but I do think there's a risk of him getting some benchings in upcoming times, particularly with Haaland returning and KDB as well. I think we could see Foden being benched for some games. Whereas these guys, they're all nailed to start and play 90 minutes. And most of them are penalty takers as well, or at least I expect them to be. We've got Cole Palmer, who I think is the #1 midfielder in FPL, bar Salah and Son. I really do. Like, his stats are just absolutely amazing. 90 minutes, penalty taker, in fantastic form. And yeah, expected points-wise, he looks really good going forwards as well. Saka, I really like him. Mr. Consistent for Arsenal across the season. You know, 14 returns from 19 starts. Now to start for them. No competition for his position. And yes, he might not take all of them because he does give some of them away, but he is Arsenal's designated penalty taker. Jared Bowen, the only thing missing for Bowen is penalties. He's nailed for 90 minutes for West Ham. Yes, he didn't score against Brighton, but I wouldn't let that put me off him. I think he's a great asset. It will continue to return across the season. One thing to comment on about Bowen, his goals always exceed his XG. He is an absolutely elite finisher. So when you look at his underlying numbers compared to his goals, season on season, he overperforms his underlying numbers. So yeah, I wouldn't let that put me off. Richarlison, I think he's going to be the starting #9 for Spurs, and probably, I think, likely to take the penalties off of Son as well. And then we got Elise. Seems to be the penalty taker now for Palace. When both him and Eze were on the pitch against Man City, Elise took the penalty. And yeah, 0.7 expected returns per 90. He's a fantastic option. Now, I've already made a video talking about my favourite wildcard draft, but I thought I'd piggyback that onto this video because, you know, some players might have multiple assets that are off to the AFCON and Asia Cup. And we, of course, have our second wildcard available to us. And, you know, it might well be time just to play that second chip, particularly if you have, like, I've seen people with 4 or 5 African or Asian players. And to be honest, I'd rather play my wildcard than take a -8 or a -12 to get rid of them. So here is the best wildcard draft I could make. I'm not going to go through it all in detail. I think you can read the players for yourself. What I have done, one mistake that might be spotted at least, is some of these players come in at slightly different values to what you might be able to buy them for. And what I've done basically, I've built this team with my FPL bank balance in Drafthound. So yeah, there's a question mark on money in the bank. But what I've done is I've left well over $1 million in the bank upon building this team, which means regardless of what position you're in terms of cash in the bank, everyone watching this video should be able to build this team. And I think with the likes of Udogie on the bench, if you really wanted to, you could downgrade him to someone like Charlie Taylor and save yourself another $1 million if you fancied it. So I think this team should be affordable to everyone. A couple of players I say are interchangeable. Already mentioned Udogie. I think you could swap him out for anyone cheaper than him. To be honest, I think you could potentially argue there are better defenders than him. I really like him, but yeah, I can definitely see an argument for someone else. And Phil Foden as well. I didn't mention him on my top Salah and Son replacements. As you can see, these are my top 5. I do think, though, if you're building your wildcard draft with the fixture run that City have, I do quite like Phil Foden as well. So he's made my wildcard draft, and partly because he's got really good expected points in Drafthound too. But if you do fancy another midfielder instead of Phil Foden, obviously I put together this really long list before about them. So take your pick from this lot, really. But yeah, I think in summary, that's probably the best wildcard draft you can build. All right then, and that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave me a like rating, subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be just here, and let me know in the comments what you think of my thoughts and opinions shared in this video. You know, I don't mind hearing people with different opinions. In fact, I actually value it because it helps me become a better player too. So if you have one, please share it in the comments. And yeah, I'll catch you in my next video.